cloud and mobile-first world is changing the game for IT and security professionals. Our next speaker is David Baker, the Chief Security Officer at Okta, and he will be speaking about the past, present, and future of identity, and how enterprises need to secure and protect their data by focusing on their user identities, both in the cloud and on their mobile devices. Please welcome David.
Thank you. So I want to talk about the future of identity security. And I've sort of taken identity, which is one of those core central things that we manage within IT and security, and I've kind of put them together because where we see things happening is identity is really the key piece of security in today's world. So when I talk about identity, who sort of thinks about what your identity is? Is it your stuff that's on your driver's license? Maybe it's what you have in social media. I mean, that's where most people are sort of focusing their identities, like what I have in social media. And, or is it like one of my credentials that was lost with Yahoo's breach? Well, it just so happens that Active Directory was really that center of gravity of the digital identity. And when I say digital identity, that's because what your identity is now, it's digital. It may be in a driver's license, it may be in a national passport, it may be in social media, it may be on your iPhone, but it's all pieces to the same thing, and it is digital. But Active Directory really was, for the longest time in the enterprise, that center of gravity for identity. It was where we put groups, where we put all of our access controls, and really, if we wanted to actually drive federations into other companies where we didn't have to use passwords to actually get services and so on and so forth, or connect, or even bring your BlackBerries to use within your corporate environment, Active Directory was really that core piece of your identity, right? But now, software is changing, right? And before, whether it's just a stack of a computer on a desktop in your SAP or Microsoft and Oracle, software is really sort of eating the world. And you have cloud services, you have mobile devices, you have on-premise devices, you have different operating systems, and it's no more just a person sitting at a desk that's your employee. Now you have service providers, you have consultants, you even are exposing services to your customers, right? So what we see is a lot of companies, as they're going through their digitization process, rather than having a mail that they send out to their customers, they are standing up a digital portal and having customers interact with them via an application or an app on their device. And so the context of identity now is changing, right? Now we have the context of multiple identities across multiple providers, right? Like I said before, you have a national identity, you may have an organizational identity, you have a professional identity, you have a social identity, and you have a device identity, right? Many of you have a thumbprint now that is hashed on a piece of, a chip in your phone now that allows you to actually authenticate, right? So these are all pieces of your identity. And the relationships between these identities becomes very, very important, right? What I'm going to say now is think of these as signals, right? You have different identities in different places, but they're all signals. And I'll get to why that's important later. Now, stepping back a little bit, we know that the security challenge has always been how do you be secure, how do you deploy things easily, and how do you make things very usable. And at this current state right now, security is sort of pushed aside, right? You may see the fact that if I want to provide context to my applications so that I can have, when I post to Instagram, I can actually cross-post it to Facebook, I have to provide that context. I have to actually allow this application to talk to that application, even though I may be authenticated to both applications, right? Not only that, I'm still using a password to actually make that authentication occur, right? Passwords are just not going away fast enough, right? Because they're easy, they're efficient, they're negligible cost per user, and they're much easier to reset your password than it is to reset your second factor, right? If you think about all the different types of second factors, whether it's a biometric, your voice, your thumbprint, how do you change your iris scan, right? Do you get a new eye? You change your hash, but that becomes very, very difficult if you're relying on a piece of you, of who you are, and trying to change that factor when you want to actually quote-unquote, change your authentication. And so that is the backdrop, right? The identity still seems to be a username and password. Well, that's actually going to change, because the bigger problem here is now the identity is the perimeter, right? It's not your network devices. It's not your iPads. It's not your computers. Your endpoint is your identity, right? It's you. You are the endpoint to your company. And your identity and how you access your company is that endpoint. You've probably heard of BeyondCorp. This is where Google determined, like, instead of having everything in a network perimeter, I'm just going to push everything out to the network, right? It's going to be in the internet. And they determined that likely that, why not, right? Network that I build, that I maintain, that I service is as insecure or as secure as the internet, right? Essentially, internal network as dangerous as the internet. And they can do this because Google has a very centric approach to how the apps that they're using, the devices that they're handing out, and the identities that they're managing and, within their data centers that they're building. They have a very, very broad contextual awareness of their users, right? But if you're not Google, how do you do this, right? How do you take this identity context and you actually create attributes and you actually are able to manage this perimeter of identities, right? And you can do that today by, one, having different attributes. And these are the attributes that you would find typically in your Active Directory. Now these attributes are going to exist in all different types of applications that you're using. These are the different signals that I was talking about earlier. These signals can basically provide context of attributes to a user. You'll also have the attributes on your device, right? These are the things that are going to be sitting in memory or on the chipset in your mobile device, right? And also things like YubiKey that Patrick showed earlier. These are actually types of context that can be provided and leveraged sort of per transaction that users can do, whether it's on an application or with the device itself. So these things can be leveraged to provide similarly what Google is doing with BeyondCorp. But it's all based upon the context of the identity. Where we really want to get to is this, right? This passwordless authentication, where I get a token from the server, and I'm leveraging my hashed identity that sits on my device, and then I actually activate that identity with a piece of biometric, right? This is great, and this actually can happen right now in the enterprise. This is being delivered to enterprises right now. The problem is it's only half of the solution. When I create a session through this mechanism, the longer that session stays open, the less confident I am of that access, the less confident I am of that identity, right? Because that exposes, the time of that session is exposed to session stealing and other man-in-the-middle types of an attack. So what I need to do is also have a means by which I can continually validate this access. And this is the other half of what the future of identity is, which is always being able to determine the context of that identity, right? What device am I coming from? What time of day? What applications am I using? How I'm taking all of these signals that I have, whether it's my device, whether it's the other application, and using my authentications and those things together to give that context, right? And that's how I'm going to be able to get a risk profile, how I'm going to be able to adapt what that user has access to, and essentially constantly validate that passwordless authentication, right? And so really, if we think about the future of identity, you're going to have a single identity. All of these places where your identity currently exists, they're going to converge, and it will be a digital identity that you'll use through identity provider, and it could be multiple identity providers. Hopefully it's Okta. But you will be leveraging the access of that identity with attributes, right? And these attributes that are coming from different signals will be able to provide the authority and the confidence of that attestation of that identity, right? Continuous authentication is going to be key, and with that continuous authentication is going to be the ability to kill sessions, and so on and so forth. And access control, it's going to all be risk-based, so I can adapt to users' identity access based upon what they're doing, when they're doing it, and how they're doing it, and learning from that, right? And it's all based upon being able to share those signals across different applications. Thank you.